Tonight, we welcome Louisiana Governor and Republican presidential candidate Bobby Jindal to our center seat. Joining him on the panel, syndicated columnist George Will, Mara Liasson, national political correspondent, National Public Radio, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Governor, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, listen, there's a lot of reaction, and I've heard you out on the stump reacting to the Supreme Court and the decisions last week. In one sentence, in one stop, you said if the court is going to say that words have no meaning, if the court's not going to follow the Constitution, why don't we save some money and get rid of the Supreme Court? What's the point of having a Supreme Court if it's not going to apply the Constitution? I understand hyperbole, but it raised some eyebrows here in Washington.
Sure. Well, Bret, obviously that was a glib suggestion. I'm not saying get rid of a complete branch of government, but I will say this. I'm surprised, it was surprising to me how many Republicans here in D.C., the leaders, the establishment, were actually happy with the court's decisions. Since when was defeat a good thing? There were Republicans that said, oh, good, this, quote, distraction about marriage is now off the table. On Obamacare, good, we no longer have to come up with a substitute or replacement. I think that's ridiculous. You heard Jeb Bush say we've got to be willing to lose the primary to win the general. I've got a different idea. What if we embrace our principles, run as conservatives, stop hiding from what we believe, stop trying to make the left and the media like us? Only in D.C. would losing be a bad thing, or be a good thing.
Right now, same-sex marriage is the law of the land. Under a President Jindal, is that different?
Look, I'm not going to stop fighting to keep marriages between a man and a woman. I support there are efforts in this city to restore our 10th Amendment rights when it applies to this issue. I continue to support those efforts. Here's where the next fight's, and it's not coming, it's here. It's about religious liberty. Already Christian businesses are facing discrimination if they don't want to participate in wedding ceremonies that violate their sincerely held beliefs. This fight's coming to churches, to pastors, to individuals. In Louisiana, I've done an executive order. We have done a Religious Freedom Restoration Act. We need to stand up for our First Amendment rights. The court trumped our 10th Amendment rights by overturning states' decisions. Now the left wants our First Amendment rights.
But I guess my question is, do you fight on the same-sex marriage battlefield?
Oh, absolutely. I will continue to fight to keep marriages between a man and a woman, both politically, and I also think that this is a fight that has to happen culturally as well in our society. An earthly court doesn't change for me an institution that was created, that was defined by God. My Christian faith teaches me marriages between a man and a woman. Look, Hillary Clinton said those of us, in a different context, those of us that are pro-life need to have our religious beliefs changed. My religious beliefs are not between me and Hillary Clinton. They're between me and God. I'm not changing them just because they're politically correct or unpopular with Hillary Clinton or the New York Times.
Charles.
But without changing your religion, we're talking about the earthly court. Is there anything you would do in the states or nationally or in Congress to change the fact that as of Friday, gay marriage is the law of the land? Is there anything you would do in an earthly way in legislation, constitutionally, or otherwise that would change that?
Sure. I've previously supported, there have been efforts for a constitutional amendment to define marriage between a man and a woman.
You would push for that as president?
I've supported that before. I continue to support that. There are also efforts to try to stop the court from overriding states' decisions. Again, a violation of the 10th Amendment. In Louisiana, this was decided by our legislature, put into our state constitution with an overwhelming majority, with a bipartisan vote, at a time when we had a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate. The court threw that out, and when you listen to John Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, had nothing to do with the Constitution.
But in the civil rights era, that was called nullification, which is the states overruling a Supreme Court decision. Are you saying you would support that in the case of gay rights in Louisiana?
No, look, we have said clearly our agencies. We were in the middle of a lawsuit. We'd actually won. I've said our agencies have no choice but to follow the court ruling. I don't agree with it. I'm going to continue to fight it. We're continuing to fight. I put out a memo today about reminding folks, my executive council did, on the religious liberty rights in Louisiana. I don't think people should be forced by their government to participate in a wedding ceremony that violates their beliefs. But we have no choice but to follow our agencies have no choice but to follow the court's ruling. But we're still going to fight. We're not, unlike some in D.C., I don't view this as a, quote, distraction. I view this as a core principle, something we believe in.
George.
Ted Cruz says he would favor retention elections, that is, making justices every 8 years, and in the after their second national election after they've been appointed to the court, stand for re-election. Would you favor that, or would you favor what Teddy Roosevelt favored in 1912, which was having public referenda, not only on judges, but on particular opinions.
Look, I understand the frustration, but I don't know why the senator said that. To Bret's point, I said, let's just get rid of the court, let's save some money. I think the real solution here is for our president to actually appoint justices that will read the Constitution. Actually appoint justices. You know, this was a bad week for the court and the rule of law. So you had justices, as Scalia said, that words no longer have meanings. You've got, in the Obamacare case, you've got Chief Justice saying this ruling had nothing to do with the Constitution. I think the easiest way to fix this is to appoint justices who will actually read a dictionary, read the Constitution.
But you would not go where Ted Cruz has gone with plebiscites.
Two things. One, I don't think adding more politics to this body fixes it. And secondly, we also, look, I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative. I also understand we have a bigger issue in terms of where the culture is moving. It's not clear to me if there was a vote, it would necessarily turn out the way that I would want it to turn out, especially if you look at polls. Unlike Hillary Clinton and President Obama, my beliefs aren't evolving with the polls when it comes to marriage. The easiest thing for any politician to do, it's clear to me, is to simply read an opinion poll. That's what the court did. That's what the president's done. I'm not evolving with the polls.
Mark.
On Obamacare, if you're president, Obamacare goes away. That's what you've promised to do. What do the 10 million or so people who have it now get in its place when you're the president?
Well, they actually get what the then Senator Obama promised. He said he was going to lower costs. He said he was going to oppose the individual mandate. He said he was going to oppose the Cadillac tax. I'm the only candidate that actually has a detailed plan on how to get rid of Obamacare and replace it. For Republicans, it's a great one-liner. I've actually got a plan. They're welcome to use mine if they like.
What's the shorthand for your plan?
So, look, it would be standard tax deductions, cross-state purchase of insurance, voluntary purchasing pools, expanded access to health savings accounts, medical savings accounts, crackdown on frivolous lawsuits. It would drive down premiums on average $5,000 for an average family. Secondly, $10 billion a year to the states to help those that are priced out of the individual marketplace, those that may have pre-existing conditions, those that may not otherwise be able to afford their health care. Specific reforms to Medicaid and Medicare. Third, making health care truly portable for consumers, for providers. This does what the president said he wanted to do, which is to drive down the cost, make health care affordable. But what it doesn't do is put bureaucrats between doctors and their patients. Look, the court ruling ruled that it wasn't unconstitutional, this one part of it, and I think they were wrong. It doesn't replace the fact this bill doesn't do what it was supposed to do. Costs are still going up. People don't have high-quality access to high-quality affordable health care.
More with Governor Jindal. Thanks for sticking around. After a quick break, we'll talk foreign policy and a little politics on Center Seat. The panel now, Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal in our center seat. Governor, we want to talk foreign policy. I want to ask you about the situation in Greece, the geopolitical impact of it, but we asked people on Twitter and Facebook to write in. Richard Dreyer asked this. Ask Governor Jindal, what can we do to avoid becoming Greece? So let's start with what your thought about Greece is first.
Well, so look, Greece is an important ally. This is between the people of Greece and the EU. Yes, they need to cut their government spending, but they need to do more than that. They need to get back to growth. You look at their pension laws, you look at their tax rates, you look at their regulatory structure. They've got to encourage private sector economic growth. But your viewer's question is exactly the right question to be asking. Greece is going to be us if we're not careful. The reality is, look, today you had breaking news from Greece, from Puerto Rico. That's going to be the United States if we stay on the same path that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama want for this country. We have a new entitlement program. We can't afford the ones we've got. We've got no plan to pay off the debt or balance the budget.
All right, so it's at $19 trillion. How do you get it to zero?
Well, one, you got to start by shrinking the government, not slowing the growth rate, actually shrinking. And that means reforming our entitlement programs. I've endorsed premium support in the Medicare program. I was the executive director of the bipartisan commission in the 90s that came up with this idea of how to help beneficiaries and taxpayers. The federal government is doing several things it shouldn't be doing. As a couple of examples, the Federal Department of Education spends billions of dollars on teacher quality programs that aren't proven to actually improve teacher quality. They need to get out of that business, either get rid of those programs, block grant those dollars to the states. Medicaid, there's a lot of waste. Go to global grants where the states have more accountability, more flexibility. You could save a lot of money there. There was an Oregon study for 2 years after they did Medicaid expansion in Oregon. No improvement in physical health outcomes despite all the money they spend. The EPA, they're trying to regulate CO2, ozone, water in people's backyards. Talk about federal overreach. We cut our budget in Louisiana 26%, over 30,000 fewer state government bureaucrats since I've been governor. That's the kind of reductions we need in D.C.
Charles.
There's a big debate on the strategy to go after ISIS. The current strategy of the administration is to go through the government in Baghdad, to increase the aid, increase the weaponry, to embed our advisors. The other argument is that the Baghdad government is hopeless. It's a wing of Iran, that we should ignore Baghdad and begin to arm directly the Kurds, some of the Sunni tribes in Anbar, and the Syrian, the Kurds as well. You're the president. You've got to decide on day one, are you going to make a radical change in our anti-ISIS policy?
Yes, look, bad policies lead to bad options. This president obeyed a political deadline to get out of Iraq. As a result, we lost a lot of influence over the central government. The Kurds in both Iraq and Syria have been one of the most effective forces, not only taking on ISIS in Kobani and elsewhere, but also in protecting Christians and other religious minorities. Absolutely, we should be arming them, training them directly. Right now, the indirect assistance is not getting there effectively enough. Secondly, we have Sunni allies in the region, not just the tribes, other countries willing to help us if they are convinced we are committed to victory. The reality is they don't want to help us take on ISIS if that props up Assad and indirectly Iran. Third, I would never send an authorization of use of military force to the Congress that says, here's a 3-year deadline, here's a ban on ground troops. I would never, as commander-in-chief, tell our enemies what we wouldn't do. Fourth and finally, I would be willing to name the enemy. This president's fighting trans fat, he's fighting medieval Christians, but he won't say that we are at war with radical Islamic terrorism, and to say to the Islamic leaders, they must condemn these individuals by name, not just the violence, and say they are not martyrs going to enjoy a reward in the afterlife. Now, Charles, we may have had better options if he'd handled the situation, if he had negotiated a status of forces agreement differently, if he'd actually negotiated one. He had the opportunity. Because of the space created by the surge, we could have been in a different place. Given where we are today, absolutely we should be working with the Kurds.
George.
If Secretary Kerry brings back an Iran agreement in which A, all the sanctions come off as soon as the agreement is ratified or signed, and B, there should be no inspections of Iranian military sites, what should Republicans do? Well,
Absolutely. One, they should absolutely reject it. But secondly, this should not be binding on any future president. This administration is trying to have it both ways, George. They're trying to say it's not a treaty, we don't need full approval, yet it is going to be binding, and that's nonsense. I think the Congress made a huge mistake in the bill they passed, giving away some of their oversight authority. The reality is this: not only do they need anytime, anywhere inspections, it is laughable we're going to do a deal with a regime that's still chanting death to America, death to Israel, not freeing our prisoners, not explicitly giving up their plutonium pathway, not giving up all their enriched uranium stockpiles, not giving up many of the other things that should be part of a good deal, much less saying that they're going to cut off support for terrorism, international terrorism, Hamas, Hezbollah, and other groups. Republicans should tell this administration a bad deal is worse than no deal. You go back to Charles' question, again, this president seems determined to tell the Iranians what we won't do. So we're going to take military options off the table. I think the Republicans, I think the next commander-in-chief needs to make very clear to the Iranian regime, we will not allow them to become a nuclear power. This president, in search of a legacy, could start a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Look, the Sunni countries, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, they're not going to stand idly by and allow Iran to become a nuclear power. I fear they go and buy these resources from the Pakistanis, this technology. This legacy, this president's legacy, his worst legacy, may indeed be a nuclear arms race in the Middle East if Republicans, if the next commander-in-chief don't stand up and stop him.
One more panel with Governor Jindal. We'll start with Mara Liasson on politics after Center Seat continues after this. And we're back with our panel and Republican presidential candidate, Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal. Before I get to Mara, I want to put up this poll, Governor. The latest Fox News poll has you tied for 11th in the GOP preference. As you know, the top 10 are invited as an average of polls August 6th in Cleveland. If you don't make the top 10, will you take part in the forum early in the day?
Look, we haven't made any decisions about that. I definitely want to talk directly to voters in Iowa and New Hampshire. I'll say this. Polls don't scare me. If I listen to polls, I never would have run for governor, never would have privatized our charity hospital system, never would have done statewide school choice, never would have taken on big challenges. I mentioned earlier, we've cut our state budget 26%, top 10 state for private sector job growth, largest income tax cut in our state's history. I think our country is looking for somebody to go to D.C. and make big changes. I get the sense from primary voters, they don't want the D.C. establishment trying to clear the field or pick their nominee for them. They want to decide.
So you haven't decided, though?
No, look, I'm not even in this race a week yet. We're going to Iowa later tonight to go talk directly to the voters.
Okay, Mark.
Are there primary states that you feel that you have to win in order to vault yourself from the back of the pack to the top? And if you were on the ticket, what blue states could you turn red?
Well, a couple of things. One, I want to win every state. I'm tired of Republicans trying to divide up the electorate or saying this special interest group or that. Look, I think our message applies to everybody. I think after 7 years, voters are frustrated. Their kids have a tougher time joining the middle class. I'll give you one example. We fought hard for school choice in Louisiana. I think the quality of a child's education shouldn't depend on their zip code. I think that is appealing to families in blue states, in red states, in purple states. Half of our Senate Democrats, a quarter of our House Democrats voted for it. 90% of the kids benefiting in one scholarship program in our state are minority kids. Most of those don't come from Republican households. I think Republicans need to fight for 50 states. I think we need to fight for every vote. We need to have the courage of our convictions. Our ideas are better. Let's go fight for them.
You know, every other candidate has a theory about why they can win a general election and appeal to parts of the electorate that Republicans haven't been able to. Do you think you can do that?
Absolutely.
And where would you do better than other Republicans?
Well, look, a couple of things. We won 2 landslide elections in Louisiana, setting records. I think what that shows is if you offer a positive, specific message. I'm the only candidate with detailed plans on health care, on energy, on education, on foreign policy. This election will be an election of substance. Secondly, I think voters are saying the hour's late. America is a great country. Our best days can be ahead of us. But in this city, it's Democrats and Republicans that tell you you can't repeal Obamacare, you can't balance the budget, you can't do term limits, you can't actually shrink the size of government spending. Nonsense.
George.
Hillary Clinton is obviously going to try and, she says, lift student debt. We have $1.3 trillion of student debt, more than credit card debt, more than auto loan debt. How do you lift it without just ratifying default? Do you have a plan?
Yeah, one, you have to grow the economy. So kids are getting good paying jobs. Part of the reason student debt is so hard for them to pay off is the Obama economy. Secondly, I think we need to break up the government monopoly. Something they snuck as part of Obamacare was they took the right away. Now there's a big debate in Congress, should students be able to refinance their debts? Well, if they had choice where they could go to refinance their loans, this wouldn't be a debate in D.C. They could go do that. Banks would compete for their business. In Louisiana, we have a state-run program called TOPS. We have a scholarship program that helps students afford their college. I know that in D.C., the Democrats think the federal government knows best. They're trying to promise free community college. Well, George, why not promise a free car, free college, free house? Why stop at community college? We can't afford the government we've got. The best way to help students with student debt is a good paying job. I'd also like to break up the accreditation monopoly to have more competition within higher education to drive down the cost of higher education.
All right, Charles, quickly.
Lightning question. How well do you have to do in New Hampshire and Iowa?
Well, look, I want to win every state, and we're spending a lot of time in Iowa.
How well do you have to, how high do you have to place?
I'm in Iowa to win it. Anything less than first place in every state's going to disappoint me. We're going to get first place in every state. That's what we're fighting for.
We tried to pin you down here. Yeah.